now that we are we're at least halfway through. We're rolling towards 2/3 of the way through season number one of the Scott Nagy experience. Just from a basketball perspective, what is for Racer fans that may not have seen SIU in person yet? What is the biggest difference between the Brian Mullins version of the Salukis a year ago, the last several years, and now what Scott Nagy's bunch is bringing to the court?
It's a really good question, Jeff. Appreciate the time as always, brother. It's always great to talk to you. I Heading into the year, you would have thought by just interviews and how Coach Nagy typically wants to play, you would see, for example, his Kim Pom possessions would be really high. Would be a team that you would think would score probably in the upper 70s in terms of points per game. Would be a team that played really, really fast. None of those things have really been able to bleed over. Early on this season, Southern was playing with a little bit of pace, and they were getting points and scoring at a high level, but defensively they were just really, really bad. And especially early on in league play, defense was really non-existent at times, Jeff. But now, over the last 2 weeks, Coach Nagy has really made a shift in how they construct game plans. And one of the biggest changes was he made Steve Hawkins, one of his top assistants, his defensive coordinator. Tay Gibbs, who was with him at Wright State, is more of his OC, working kind of in hand to hand with Scott Nagy. Javon Mayman, who's been on staff, he's kind of more in charge of substitutions and lineups. And not to say that that is the decision and that's what has made Southern play better. There's many, many other factors that go into it. But now Southern is winning with defense. So to your question, where a lot of Brian Mullins teams were known to grind you out, really defend you, and of course, depending on the year, where you had a Marcus Damask, Lance Jones, or Xavier Johnson like last year, you could have a guy kind of take over, from a scoring standpoint. This isn't a Southern Illinois team where even though right now Ali Deba is scoring at a good clip, Kennard Davis and Jarrett Hensley are scoring at good clips. This still isn't a team or a roster where you look at and go, there's probably that one guy you can count on consistently to do that. Those guys lately have been, but for the most part this year, it's been up and down for those guys. So I would say it's really kind of ironic. At the start of the year going into it, I think there were many descriptions that you would describe what a Coach Nagy team would be like, man, polar opposite from what you would see from a Coach Mullins team. And now, just over the last couple of weeks, where they've had to grind out some games, and it's not necessarily they're just shooting the ball out of this world. They've had to learn to do it defensively. So it's just kind of ironic over the last week or so and a half. Southern's kind of gotten back to some defensive roots, and that's why the season has been able to flip to this point, and they've been able to win 3 in a row after losing the first 5 of league play.
How much did the injury to Elijah Elliott hurt this team? Just watching them, watching SIU early in the year, it felt, and this was maybe a bit of a reach in terms of a comparison, but it felt like your Xavier Johnson from a year ago, where it was like, man, the ball's in his hands a lot, and whether he's going to be the one trying to score or he's going to make the last decision to let somebody else score. But for him to, I believe it was torn ACL at the Florida game and losing him for the year, how much, teams evolve, stuff happens, but it certainly felt like that kind of knocked things off kilter, at least for a little while.
Don't want to say, Jeff, when I answer this question to you, that I want Murray State fans to think, oh, Luke Martin would think that Southern would be contending for the league title if Elijah Elliott was healthy. That's not what I'm going to imply when I say this. But Elijah was the one who made this team have pace. He played with tremendous pace, and he could get Southern into their offense quickly, whether an opposing team was making a bucket or not. And he was also someone who could go and get his shot, which not necessarily has gotten better. Guys are starting to figure out now where they can get their shots and where they can go get their buckets. Elijah knew that really from the start. And he was not quite the distributor like X was, or even to the extent, of course, scoring wise. I mean, when X had 630 plus scoring games last year, it's kind of a hard clip to continue. But Elijah was without a doubt, no question. He kept you in like the College of Charleston game to start off the year. There were other games where you could tell at times he could just shoot the ball at such a high clip and no question was Southern's best point production guy, and just made so much more go. So to answer your question, how much has it really impacted Southern? I can't tell you in terms of wins and losses, but in terms of how they have to play now, changes it a ton. It is a complete 180 from what Southern wanted to be, and kind of where Coach Nagy was like, "We got to be this." Which I think there's two parts to that. I think one, you feel obviously bad for Elijah, but two, you got to give Coach Nagy and his staff credit and the guys credit. I mean, they're not trying to do repeat insanity and just say no. This is the way we have to play. We got to play my way. They've had to evolve because if there was no evolution, if they were not going to evolve after losing Elijah Elliott early, there would still be a lot of tough results that Southern would be taking.
There is a phrase I repeat all the time that I'm trying sometimes to get fans to settle down a little bit, that not every loss is an indictment on the program. And there are times you just get beat. Uh, there are also sort of mini seasons within a season. And so things get turned around, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But there was, it would not be hard to argue that maybe 2 weeks ago, if you wanted to say the Salukis were ready for April and, maybe some folks ready to move on or just get to the beach or whatever. 5-11, and you went through this stretch where, and I know you got to live through it, and I hate to pick scabs here, but first conference game coming back after Christmas, you're in Cedar Falls, you're up 9 in the first half. I like took the dog for a walk, come back, and you're down 27 in the second. Like it was just a complete unraveling there against Northern Iowa. You come home, play Evansville, and it's just I don't know what happened. You miss 25 threes. You get beat by 15 by Evansville, and then Kennard Davis, I believe, is the one that does not play at Illinois State. And not that that probably ultimately mattered, as you get beat by 31. And that's the moment I'm like, things are not great in Carbondale right now. And then you go to Belmont, it's 90 to 86. And that was like the pilot light just flickered for just a minute. And it's like, okay, maybe they're not dead yet. Couple wins over Missouri State. Fine. They can't beat anybody right now. It's easy to kind of pat that on the head. And then Northern Iowa comes back and you just boat race them at the Benterra Center. So what in the world has happened from we get trucked in Cedar Falls, we get awful at home against Evansville, we get absolutely run out of the building in Normal, and now in the last 2 weeks it's like, oh, we're actually might be a pretty good basketball team just in time for Murray State to show up. Isn't that great for the Racers? Just it again, it speaks to the seasons within the seasons, but something has happened. What has happened right now for the guys?
Thanks for making me relive this trauma, Jeff.
I
You're
I
always
tried to sandwich it. I tried to go good, bad, good. I'm trying to help out a little bit.
no. Look, it was a talking point that we had with Dan Muller on our podcast network that we had a week ago, and my question to him was, how much can change in a week within the Missouri Valley Conference? And when I asked Coach Muller that question, he just started laughing because there are just so many factors, Jeff, where you want to talk about the schedule, number one, who you're playing. Sometimes fans just want to look at win or loss, and I get it, but
Sure.
that is what it's about. But also, there's a 50% equation here. You bring 50% of it, and your opponent does as well. And who you play in that stretch matters. Injuries matter. Are you completely healthy? Where you're at in the portion of your season, definitely no question matters. But to get to the heart of it, and I'll even dig a little bit deeper, you look at those first four Valley games, Jeff, Southern trailed by at least 21 points in all of those games. I mean, it wasn't just that Southern was getting beat. It's one thing to get beat. And I think everyone this year, with so much roster turnover, with a new coach, a new coaching staff, anyone that expected it to be a well-oiled machine from the start, I would say was a little bit clueless and probably doesn't look. I mean, why is Drake having so much success? Everyone was like, "Well, Drake's having success." Yeah, I mean, Ben McCullum brought half of his team with him. They
They played
understood.
together for years.
They
Yes.
understand the expectation. Bradley, even Zeke Montgomery, who comes back, he understands the expectation under Brian Wardle. I mean, it's not a surprise that the teams that have had the most stability or the teams that have the most continuity are performing at a little bit higher level and better. I don't think that's any sort of surprise. But Southern was not competing. And that is what was not sitting well, not just with the fans, but it wasn't sitting well with the coaches. It was sitting well with the players. And I give Coach Nagy credit after the game the other night, beating Northern Iowa. He said, "Luke, we were playing at an embarrassing level, not just not good enough level, not a bad level. It was an embarrassing level." There was maybe I think there was one lead change, Jeff, in those first four league games, and that was when Northern Iowa took the lead and never looked back. There was maybe I think four ties. Not that that's a great indicator of effort because, as you know, games are wonky and ties and lead changes are not always a great indicator. But it was just another indicator that the effort's not there. And we're not even getting into execution. It's just effort isn't there. And everybody had a long look at themselves. The post-game locker room at Illinois State is one that our players have referenced a ton. To kind of piggyback really, or to go backtrack real quick. Not only did you not play against Evansville, that was also the day where there was a balloon drop in Banterra Center, and all the balloons didn't even drop. So, I mean, like, not only
All systems failure. Yes.
not only did the game not go well, even the balloons that were supposed to drop, half of the balloons didn't even drop. So you're like, man, this is just more insult to injury. But the Illinois State game, everyone has said was the rock bottom. I think everyone wished that rock bottom was earlier for the group. But to lose by 31, it was extremely ugly. I think everyone at that point in time knew something's got to change. And Southern has completely flipped what they do defensively. Offensively, they are doing some new things, but they have finally taken the approach, Jeff, where they know defense has got to feed their offense. This is not a team that's going to shoot well. In our podcast over the summer, when we caught up, I told you I don't think this is going to be a really good shooting team. This will have to be a team that has to do the little things, which is they have to be elite at rebounding and they have to be elite at defending. If they are not good in those two areas, they're just not going to shoot themselves to many wins. That's just not what this team's makeup is. So that's been the flip, Jeff. And to try to show that to the fans is, yes, everybody, we as broadcasters, you live and die at times with the results of your team, but it is a long season and there's still a long way to go too in this thing. It's far from being over. As quickly as it got away from a school like SIU and as quickly as it came back, it can also quickly go away again.
Yeah, nobody knows that better than the racers. Like I said, a good week, and then like I said, come back from Iowa, and you're just like, man, we're ready to, we got Final Four tickets ready to go. It's just like, and then just there's another good team come. There's just no nights off in this league, and that it's hard for people to understand, but it is crazy. Kennard Davis, and again, don't need to get into any details, but he got sat down for the old coach's decision, and message was sent to him in that Illinois State game, and since then took him a little while to get going, but he is now going. Gets 24 the other night against Northern Iowa, and certainly one of your big weapons. What did you see from the radio seat of maybe? What coach saw that he didn't like, and now what has flipped for him to be back to certainly producing at a level that and sometimes it's not about the production. There's a lot of other intangible things, but what's been the change with Kennard?
Yeah, for Racer fans that don't know, and you kind of alluded to it, Kennard didn't play at Illinois State because of injury or sickness. It was a coach's decision. And Coach Nagy said, Luke, it's between us, it's between the team, but Kennard knows where he fell short. And we, in a time where things were at that time not going well for Southern Illinois, and then you mix in that your best player is not playing and you lose by 31, that's a point where things could go one way or another. And there were a little bit of signs going into that game too for Kennard. I believe it was the previous three games for him heading into that Illinois State game, which he missed. He had 0 steals combined, 3 assists to 8 turnovers, and only 12 rebounds total. And I believe 11 of them came in one game against Evansville. Again, I always think effort can be a crutch that you fall on, and it may not always be fair to be like, well, that guy's just not giving effort.
Right.
But in the areas that you can always count on Kennard, rebounds and steals and all those things that really your effort speaks volumes. And recently, not factoring in what happened against Northern Iowa, since the Illinois State game, 21 rebounds, 12 assists, only 5 turnovers, 5 steals, and he had 38 points prior to his over 20 the other night against Northern Iowa. So over 60 points combined in that stretch. So he's scoring it, he's defending it at a high level, and he knows, Jeff, that he can affect so many others on this team. A lot like Damian Mayo. Damian Mayo has been a big piece of this too here in the recent, even though you look at the stats and Mayo's name is not necessarily going to fluctuate to the top, but I would say Kennard Davis's energy and Damian Mayo's energy has completely transformed Southern from a defensive team and a defensive perspective that now has given Southern hope. And not just give Southern hope, I think it's totally rejuvenated this team in terms of what they want their identity to be.
So the Salukis start 0-5 and now 3-5. And as I've kind of said more than once, it just the league is so from 1 to 11. I feel like Missouri State is the outlier. They're not going to 120. They're going to pick some people off this year, but I feel until something changes radically, they're number 12 of 12. But really 1 through 11, it's a nightly rock fight. And I said, if somebody wins 5 in a row at any point, it is going to make such a change and sort of upward trajectory where they can go, because I know Bradley is sitting at 7-1. I feel like they're going to win the league, but they could be 16-4, 15-5 before this whole thing's over, because they're going to get picked off at 3-5 in a 5-way tie for seventh right now at SIU, and yet you are 2 whole games out of fourth. I mean, it's like you're still what you want to get to is still there. What is the ceiling in your mind of the upward trajectory for this team of what they can they ultimately get to? Is 10-10 out of line right now?
No, I mean, I don't. And look, you also have to factor in what your schedule is, Jeff. And Southern does not have to go to Drake. That's a big break. That's one of the breaks that Southern is going to have. They get Drake at home on February 1st. Their other one off is Indiana State, which they won't see Indiana State till the very last game of the regular season in Terre Haute. Uh, I think a lot of it's going to depend on Southern's success within the next week. And with Murray at home, of course, Wednesday night, which is why we are talking. Then you have a road stretch that if you would ask me in July, would the UIC Valpo road swing be a difficult road stretch? Probably tell you, probably not. That's going to be a really brutal back-to-back road game stretch, which obviously Racer fans know all about how tough it is at UIC. And then Valpo is no doubt tremendously improved. Then you come back home with Drake. Uh, I've always looked at it this way, Jeff, and I think it was a stat that I gave you earlier on this season when we were just conversing. Again, not saying that Southern Illinois is going to win a Missouri Valley Conference championship, but if you want to win a Valley title, what do you have to do? Yes, you have to win on the road, but you have to be good at home. And you look at all of the Valley championships, you combine them all from the first one in 76 77 to the last one in 06 07. Southern was 61-2 at home in those years. And so, what's the recipe to get there, Jeff? What the recipe, I think, Southern is what they've done really well, which is you got to take it day by day. And the message early, Coach Nagy would tell us, well, I've started off 0-2 before and won the league. And I do feel like this is a group that I believe can compete and win a league championship. That focus, not to say it's gone away, but it's more like we got to win the day. And Southern has won the day well over the last week and a half. I think it's what they have to keep doing, as cliche and as silly as that may sound. It's hard, Jeff. In our jobs, that's what we do, right? You look at conference standings, you look at schedules, you try to find a gap where you're like, hey, this is a stretch here where maybe it can flip. Why I say this next week and a half is important is all those teams you mentioned, Southern's going to play them. And the teams that are right now kind of colliding, that are in the middle of this thing, and we say in the middle, which is literally from 1 all the way to 11, but the teams that are scrunched here together, this is the part of the season where you start to see some separation. And that's where I think so what to answer your question, man, if you had asked me this question a week and a half ago, probably would not have been great for on-air quality in terms of what I would say in terms of the expectation. But I truly believe last year you ended up being the 6th seed, and that was a determining on literally the final day of the regular season. If you beat Northern Iowa that last game, you're the 4 seed in Arch Madness and you're not playing on Thursday. So you were within a game of being in the top 4. What would be fair, and I don't even know if it's fair after you start 0-5, but if you could somehow get back to where you were last year, I mean, I think that's a heck of a a heck of a
100%.
turnaround after where this season started. If somehow you did better than that and you're at least within striking distance, I mean, I don't think there's any Saluki fan, especially after how this year started, would not be just over the hills and ecstatic and excited about it. I know for the fan base with Bruce Weber going into the Valley Hall of Fame, they want the Salukis to play on Friday when Coach Weber gets introduced to the crowd there in St. Louis. They want to make sure that the Salukis have a game that day. But for what I think is realistic, could you get to where you were a year ago? Could you get to where that last day, that last week, you're in the hunt? And if you're in the hunt, see where the pieces fall. But I know this sounds like a really I don't know. There's a great way for me to really describe the mentality with what I'm about to describe. But at one point in time, and I think I told you this in a private conversation, so I can prove that I'm very authentic with you and your listeners, Jeff, is just compete, give yourself a chance to win. If at the end of the day, like the Belmont game, Coach Watson and I, Coach Nate, yeah, we were all disappointed, but like you'll take that feeling of competing your butt off for especially the last 20 minutes to give yourself a shot versus the way it was. So that's where I think a ceiling or where could this team go. I'll be honest with you, Jeff. I think this team has done a really good job of just taking care of day by day and seeing where that takes care. And I think it's where they need to stick at it. And let's leave the future forecasting to guys like you and me.
Last question. Wednesday night, throw it up at 6 o'clock. We get to about 6:30, winding down the first half. If you see blank, you're feeling really good that SIU is going to be able to get the win.
We were talking about on our end in our podcast version conversation, Jeff, of how Jacoby Wood, big difference between first and second halves this year. For Southern, that's been Ali Deba. And Ali Deba has been someone who has been so good in the final 20. But you saw the difference of when Ali Deba was active, engaged, and a factor. For to say all 40 would be too much, but for 34 minutes of the game, that proved to be a major difference why Northern Iowa had struggles really getting anything good looks because Ali was buying into the defensive end and he was also able to distribute and do some things well offensively. I think that's a major factor. I would say from an individual standpoint, and then just with Coach Nagy and his program and what they preach, Jeff, is they have to rebound the ball. And because they are just not going to shoot it exponentially well. So because they don't shoot it well, I mean, Southern leads the league in shots attempted at the rim. They don't really shoot a ton out on the perimeter. It's changed a little bit in the last week and a half, but the majority of their shots are going to be from the free throw line in. That's where Southern wants to get to, and they made them at a very low clip, which means you got to have opportunities to get putbacks, offensive rebounds, try to reset. Southern has been a good offensive rebounding team this year. They have not been very good defensively. That was the outlier against Northern Iowa. They were really good against UNI, which they hope bodes well going into Wednesday. But I would say Ali Deba being active for all 40 minutes for 2 halves, and then as a team angle for Southern, if they are rebounding and they're winning the boards, doesn't always equate to a win, but I don't think there is a path to a win for Southern come Wednesday if they are not active on the boards and at least competitive on the boards. If Murray State dominates the boards and they take pride in getting rebounds against Southern, it could be a really tough game for Southern Illinois.
He is Luke Martin, the voice of the Southern Illinois Salukis. Buddy, I appreciate the time as always. We'll see you on Wednesday. I wish you luck, but you know I don't mean it.
Right back at you, brother. Thanks, Jeff.